Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Big Topic Talk in our online event series. My name is Ed Green, and I am a Senior Development Manager at Grosvenor. Today, we're going to be discussing green in our cities and what is the future of green spaces in our cities. We're so grateful that you've taken the time to join us today. I really hope you enjoy the session. The event is part of the engagement program we are conducting as we consider redesigning Grosvenor Square. The square has recently returned to Grosvenor's control, and we're looking at ways to invest in it to make it more suited for the demands of urban green space in 21st century London. As we spend the time thinking about what's important for Grosvenor Square, it's a fantastic chance to explore the opportunities and challenges for the future of our green spaces across London, and indeed beyond. To kick off, I thought I'd just spend a couple of minutes sharing some of the history of Grosvenor Square with you, which personally I find rather fascinating. So it was originally laid out in the 1720s as the heart of the Grosvenor family's new build estate on the western fringes of what was then London, an area that they named Mayfair. It was one of the first examples of a developer creating a spectacular green space in a new development in order to build a reputation and so enhance value. It was a celebration of horticulture, designed to be a piece of countryside in the city, and it was a huge success, laying the foundations for the neighbourhood that we see today. The square was then redesigned in the 1770s to modernise it for the changing needs of Georgian society. But it retained its ethos as a horticultural centrepiece, with the planting becoming larger, less formal, and wilder. It was one of the first examples of formal shrubberies ever in the UK. It continued to evolve through the 19th century with various changes, the most major being in about 1850, when all the original elm trees were felled. But really, not a huge amount has changed in Grosvenor Square until the war, following which the Duke of Westminster gave the square over to be publicly accessible, formalised within its own Act of Parliament. This dramatically changed the destiny of not only the square, but of Mayfair. Along with this opening up, the square was again totally redesigned in a way that met the needs of the time and reflecting the national sentiment. It became about memorial and about the British relationship with America. For the first time, the garden ceased to be focused on celebrating the environment. The square has been largely unchanged since then, though there are more memorials. The trees have grown, but the biodiversity remains very low. Thankfully, it does still offer welcome respite to those who use it from the busyness of London. Now, Grosvenor regained management of the square in 2018, and since then we've been thinking about whether it meets the needs of modern Mayfair and modern London. What is required of a green space in the heart of the West End for the next 100 years? At the beginning of the year, we appointed Tonkin to lead the design team, and with them, we are exploring what the future of this iconic green space could be. Their approach to collective storytelling and design inspired by nature makes them the perfect partner to go on this journey with. We all love our green spaces, and in the current circumstances, we're even more aware of how important they are for our physical and emotional well-being. So during the session, we want to explore different ideas for the future of green spaces in our cities. What role do they play in creating a better, more sustainable future for both people and planet? And what does this mean for Grosvenor Square? So I'm thrilled to introduce 5 wonderful speakers who are going to help us with just that. Firstly, community gardener and walk leader, Carole Wright. Carole is the project manager, community gardener and beekeeper, and a proud South Londoner who hails from Brixton. Now living in Southwark, Carole dedicates herself to improving the community she lives in. She says, "My family instilled in me the motto, 'It takes a village to raise a child,' and I've been carrying that ethos throughout my whole adult life." Secondly, we'll hear from postdoctoral research fellow Dr. Meredith Whitten from the London School of Economics. Her research examines how green space is integrated into planning practices to address the impacts of urbanisation. She has worked as a policy analyst, economic development consultant and planner. Meredith holds a PhD in regional and urban planning and a master's in public affairs. Next up, it's Honorary President of the Black Environment Network, Judy Ling Wong. Judy is best known as President of the Black Environment Network. She was instrumental in conceptualising London National Park City, and she was awarded an OBE for pioneering multicultural environmental participation in 2000 and a CBE for her services to heritage in 2007. Also joining us is water engineer Edoardo Borgomeo. Edoardo works with UN agencies and development banks on water infrastructure and policy around the world. He is a non-resident research associate of the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford. And to complete the panel is architect Anna Liu from Tonkin. Anna is one of the project leads for the redesign of Grosvenor Square. For 19 years, Tonkin have been designing and delivering highly acclaimed buildings, landscapes, and sculptures, and each of their projects is carefully crafted in a context that frames it, the people that occupy it, and the culture that surrounds it. We'll be helped through the next hour and a quarter or so by Catherine Gregg from Make Good. Make Good are helping us facilitate the whole conversation that we want to have with everyone who has an interest in the future of the square. She'll be prompting some of the discussions with both our speakers and with you, the audience. So please do get involved and share your thoughts in the comment stream as we go. So without further ado, over to Catherine.
Hello, so thank you everybody for watching and being with us today. I'm going to start us off with a few quick questions following Ed's introduction. Then we're going to move into the talks from the speakers, and I will then be hosting a discussion. And during that point, if you have questions for the speakers, it'd be great if you can put them into the chat function and we will pose them to the speakers during the discussion section. And then we're going to finish up with trying to think, well, what do we want to take away today to apply to Grosvenor Square? So when I'm doing the first quick questions, it would be great if you can also answer them at the same time. And put them into the chat section. So first question is, what do we think the ingredients of great green spaces are? So I'm going to come to Edoardo first for that one.
Thanks, Catherine. Hello, everyone. For me, the ingredient to green spaces is blue, and that's the blue of water in all its forms, from rainwater to wastewater.
Thank you. Meredith.
I love how green spaces in urban settings provide opportunities to interact with plants and wildlife and even other people. And I love that they can make me feel connected both to nature and the city at the same time. I'm going to come to Edoardo.
And Judy, what do you think?
I feel that I'm deeply part of nature. So in a city such as London, green spaces are an essential part of my life because I connect with all the natural elements there.
Fantastic, thank you. Carole?
I agree with Meredith that it's about pollinating plants, attract wildlife, but I also think it's important the meditation and the quiet and the stillness. So there should be part of nature where you can just be, where it's not busy, because London can be busy, particularly the part where Grosvenor is. So some spaces that you can keep very still, meditate, do yoga, whatever it is, to make relax before returning to whatever busy, hectic things you're going to be up to. So yeah, mind's meditation, absolutely.
That's lovely. And Anna?
It's about exploration, the intensity and diversity of both plants and people. So the chance encounters and the ability to suspend time and become a child again and explore.
Wonderful. So if everybody watching can also write your answers to that in the chat function, that would be fantastic. And so the second question I wanted to kick off with is, what do our green spaces need to do for us? So Meredith, I'm going to come to you first.
Well, I think our green spaces need to help us and all species really live healthy, contented, and less stressed lives by connecting us with nature and improving the environment around us.
Fantastic. Carole?
I think it's access. It's access to the green spaces. It's access to knowledge about what's going on, what it takes to maintain and get involved in the green spaces. So yeah, diversity of people and thought around the green spaces and who can get involved. So yeah, let's encourage people to become citizen scientists and get excited about what the green space is about.
Edoardo?
green spaces can do two things. I think first, as functions, they can provide services. They can help us create better urban environments at large. And then at the individual level, at the experiential level, they can also help us better connect with nature and also between ourselves.
Thank you. Anna.
Green spaces can inspire us to innovate, both at the large urban scale and the tiny scale of just looking at a leaf up close and understanding that we're part of a much larger ecosystem, which is the city and the rest of the world.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Judy.
Green spaces really fill me with the joy of seeing life unfold. So I love it when the plants and the trees are planted so that I can see all the colors of the changing seasons.
Fantastic. These are such good answers. So again, audience, if you want to write your answers in the chat function, that would be fantastic. And then my first question is, what can we do for our green spaces? What can we add to them? So Anna, I'm going to come to you first.
I think we need to take a more active part in either the maintaining or the activities within the square. So we truly take ownership of the square, but that ensuring that the space remains open to everyone, and it conveys a sense of tolerance and openness to all sorts of activities.
Fantastic. Carole, I'll come to you next.
I think, like Anna, I think people should make sure that we don't lose any more green spaces, whether they're parks, community gardens. So definitely become involved, join friends of groups, National Park City. Be aware of what there is around, particularly in this time we're living through. People aren't aware that there's little pocket park spaces and larger spaces. So definitely become an activist and promote your green spaces.
Great. Edoardo.
We need to care for the green spaces, we need to share them, and also we need to think harder to design them for the challenges of the future.
And Meredith.
So we should provide, manage, and fund our green spaces to reflect how essential they really are to urban living. We should treat these spaces as critical scaffolding in a city, not just an ornamental amenity.
Fabulous. And then again, Judy.
I feel that all of us must communicate more with the managers and providers of our spaces. We need to support them, not only by volunteering, but also to write to local councillors and MPs and make sure that we emphasize the need for London to maintain and increase the quality and the area of its green spaces and make them accessible for everyone.
Fabulous. So again, audience, hopefully you've been able to put your thoughts and ideas in the chat function as well. So we're going to move on to the talks. We've got such a good lineup. I'm really excited. And we're going to start with Carole.
All right. So have we got the... Okay. All right. So I'll start then. This is an image. I haven't photoshopped this. This is me standing on a map on the floor of Blackfriars Settlement, which is on road, Blackfriars Road, where I manage 2 community gardens, and I've been involved in this community organisation for over 30 years, doing plant giveaways, going to tenants' meetings, fighting to save the critical green spaces in this very rapidly developing part of South London, which is South Bank and Bankside. So this is the part of Southwark where I live and I feel real kinship with. So the important thing is I am wearing my walking boots because I am a walk leader. It's an activity which has been instilled in me since childhood by my Jamaican mother and grandparents. So I walked everywhere. until today I walk with people to explore the green spaces and blue spaces in many parts of London. The next slide, please. So this area, very built up one, London, I'm a beekeeper. So I've been a beekeeper for 7 years, and at times I've been a member of the London Beekeepers Association. I got into beekeeping through community garden. So I've set up 3 community gardens with residents and Costain, Groundwork, Family Mosaic, Bankside Open Spaces Trust over the past 13 years. And being followed through to encourage people to come out, to understand about urban wildlife, to do honey tastings. To the majority of my time around beekeeping is encouraging planting pollen plants. And it doesn't hurt that I have a snazzy pink bee suit, not the only one. It mainly comes out for photo shoots if people are lucky. Can I have the next slide, please? These are a couple of the sixth formers I work with. So twice a week, I Art Globe Academy, a school for 4 to 18-year-olds in Southwark, and for the past 3 years, their sixth form students have been coming to the 2 community gardens I manage down in Bankside and South Bank, learning how to grow food, seed saving. We talk about environmental matters. We visit the local parks, Geraldine Mary Harmsworth, Ufford Street Park. But the very first thing they do before we even get into gardening is we go around the area so that they can see what's on their doorstep, how they might help in the community, and hear their background, because these 2 young people whose family are from Pakistan and Bangladeshi have growing experience from their heritage. So heritage, culture, and the visibility of black and brown bodies in the urban landscape have always interested, and it's a big portion of what I do and when I'm working. Can I have the next slide, please? This picture here is in an orchard to where those 2 young people were standing, and it's a fig tree. Always on my projects I ask for, and I've been fortunate to have, with the support of the community, that's the schools, that's the people on the housing estates where I work, predominantly work in this area. We have put orchards in. So we have 3 orchards on the 3 housing estates, community gardens I've helped to set up, and we always look for unusual varieties of fruit trees, ones which have a connection with the area. So in this case, we have people who have Greek Cypriot heritage, and they asked for fig trees. So this is the Blackfriars Estate. This one has an espalier orchard. The very first community garden I set up with Modern 13 years ago has mulberry, grapes and pear trees and plums. And another project in Bermondsey, White's Ground, that has quince trees. So they all have orchards, housing providers as well, housing association, tenant managed organisation and local authority. So I'm fortunate to work across all types of housing types and with residents. Can I have the next slide, please? So inspiring green space, the most inspirational green space where I was walking this morning is actually Burgess Park, which I think is a really good model for the Grosvenor design to look at, because this was designed in 1982 onwards by LDA landscape architects. And there, compared to what it like when I was growing up, it's flat. It was London. My Jamaican grandparents lived on the doorstep of this, and they didn't actually like my brother, myself, and my cousins playing in there because it had an air of menace about it. It's a redesign, which was £2 million worth of GLA money, the rest coming, 6 million coming from Southwark Council. It's become an urban oasis. There are 2 access paths which run through the park. There are hills, so I'm standing on top of a hill here over to the yard and the City of London, and to the left is the remains of the Aylesbury estate. Fantastic trees, BMX track, a lake is in there. The lake was the real turning point for this park. There's a barbecue area, so many multiculturals are held here, park runs. So yeah, highly recommend the design which has taken place to bring this vital green infrastructure back to life. Can I have the next slide, please? So we have the lake. The lake around which many people walk, and we can observe the reeds here. Also, the pond has got moorhens, Egyptian geese, blackbirds. So just to stand still at like o'clock in the morning, which is probably the optimal time to get there now with the lockdown, because there's so many people jogging, Pilates, it's all going on in this park. Incredible landscape maintenance by Veolia. So I have to give them a big up and a shout to my friend Greg, manages a wonderful team and has a real passion for urban biodiversity. Can I have the next slide, please? And this is an example of the passion of Greg and his team of Veolia. The wildflower meadows that they have here are truly stunning, and they've come into their colour now, which makes for a pleasant 1 hour of exercise and people stopping and taking photographs and just humming with wildlife. Amazing. Have the next slide, please. And also, I really enjoy the nod to history that's in this park, and very apt Camberwell Beauty Butterfly, which is on the Ling Athletic Boxing Club, which used to be a library. This is on Wells Way. So this road intersects the two parts of Burgess Park. So you can either cross over at road level, or there's a tunnel that takes you to the other side, which has got about 3 hills for you to go up. But this is amazing. So I love the idea of history, the incorporating of history into this scheme. So yeah, so that's used to be on an old paper factory in the 1886, and they transported it in 1982 as part of the redevelopment of the park. So yeah, nice nod to local history there. And talking about history and place and things, this was taken a street away from Peabody Blackfriars estate, and next to Brookwood Community Garden, which is a garden I manage. And this is Boyfield Street. The flats on this street are grade 2 listed, and it's quite scenic. And they always put bunting out at Christmas, and at any event they have really good street parties. So where I live, Peabody Blackfriars, we got involved in their street party. So this was Public Works had come in to do community consultation projects to see what can be done with disused buildings in that part of Southwark, George's, and had a feast. And as part of that, we had Ethiopian, Bangladeshi food, Turkish food, but there were the fun elements like the nod to the Thames in the shape of jelly and ice cream. So this in up in the morning for the evening event, and there we have Thames represented by fish in the form of jelly. So yeah, so make the research, I think, on these things fun, because that engages people, and I think that's important when people are doing placemaking and large scale or small scale projects. And here we are. So this is preparation for the feast, which was an English tea party, but a mashup version, which was appropriate for London as a metropolis. So here's my downstairs neighbour, Cecina, who never takes part in any projects. But when Public Works approached me and I approached friends, neighbours, people in the area, how we'd like to get involved in this project. And they said, well, our food represents who we are, what we're about. You know, we're migrants to this country, so let people sample our food. So at first they were like, you know what? That's a bit mad, isn't it? The tea party with different cultures. But then they really got into it. So we have on the tray to the left, we have Turkish, what they call cigars, which is puff pastry with lentils and other savoury fillings. So that's like a vegetarian option. And then in front, we have Ethiopian steamed bread, which is a speciality of the Ethiopian cuisine. So, and this is in a community centre, which has a whole mixture of people and events, and are currently feeding elders through COVID. So this is a vital community hub, Queensborough Centre. Can I have the next slide, please? And here we have tree hugging, an activity of mine with 8-year-old neighbours or children that I work with. And it fails to inspire me that people think you can't approach children or youth to go out into nature. So I would say always be open to the fact that in the right circumstances, with the right people working alongside the youth and the children, they will leave their electronic toys at home and go out for the hour and just look about what's in the area, what's in terms of trees, what type of bug surveys, compost. We've been through those, but you know, we have some beautiful parks. This is Geraldine Mary Harmsworth, and it's got the Ice Age Tree Trail. So we go around to the Ice Age Tree Trail, but with the proviso that I, as an adult, and any adult involved, needs to go into the playground and play and let our inner child go. So can I have the last slide, please? To which end, history, play. This is Peace Square. So I'm fortunate to live in a square, and this is the site that greets me in the morning until the evening, and it's these majestic London plane trees which go back to 1871 when the estate was formed. And it was those planners, housing estate planners, that understood the benefits of your mental and physical well-being, of you being surrounded and immersed in nature. And this square, I think, works as a model for that, because you look down. Parents allow their children to go out and play and do not sit with them because they feel they're safe and they're walled in this green environment. These trees have recently been pollarded. That's why you've got this dramatic tree shadow going on here. But just to see what can happen, just to see how the youth and the children and the elders are proud to live in a square on an estate which is looking as good as this, which is Grade 2 listed, and have a very positive relationship with ginkgo people, these contractors, and have conversations with them, with the caretaking tree team, about tree maintenance, about how they can get help. So that's how I'd like to end my talk. This is why it's me to off of here to do the work that I do to encourage people to get involved in their community. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Carole. That was a really amazing run through the idea. I love the idea of a productive state. Thank you. We're going to hear from Meredith now. Thank you, Meredith.
Hi. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I am an urban planner and green space researcher based at the London School of Economics. And before I did my PhD, I had a career in public policy. So I tend to approach my research through the lens of being both a planner and a policy analyst. The vital role that green spaces and urban greening more broadly play in cities is much more complex than simply providing passive spaces for leisure and amenity. Green spaces do an incredible amount of work, from providing cleaner air and water to cooling urban temperatures. So there actually can be very active landscapes. And this is particularly the case for green space in urban settings like Grosvenor Square. Next slide. So I took this photo a few years ago before social distancing. It's London Fields in Hackney. And in Britain, despite our love of the countryside, more than 84% of us live in urban areas. So we are very urban people, and this reflects global trends towards urbanization. Next slide, please. So in my research, I examined how green space is conceptualized. And I found that the way we think about green space is actually quite limited. We think about green space in a very narrow, kind of traditional way. Yet the opportunity to create kind of new classic parks is quite limited. So many of the benefits of these traditional spaces can be achieved in other types of green space. So when we take a less narrow view on green space and think more about urban greening, we can see how all of these green elements, including those traditional spaces, contribute to a city's overall greenness. And this is relevant for here in London, the world's first national park city. So London is considered 47% green, but a very small part of that, less than 6%, comes from those traditional parks and gardens. So that big greenness experience that we have in London comes collectively from a broad range of green elements, such as the small informal space pictured here. Next slide, please. Well, I'm missing one photo there. So these photos highlight a few ways that we can think of urban green space beyond just the traditional. Of course, each green space does not have the same benefits or allow for the same uses, but they all contribute to a more saturated greening experience. So the only photo here that's not from London is the one in the bottom left corner. This is Bosco Verticale, which is in Milan. The vegetation on this residential tower is equivalent to that found in 1 hectare of woodland. And its benefits include mitigating temperatures in the building, which reduces energy consumption. So I think that just shows us how innovative we can be when we expand our definition of urban greening. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some other examples of how we can think about greening our cities. The top left is the roof garden at Birmingham Public Library. It's a very tranquil space. It includes a wildflower meadow, which is part of the city's wildflower trail, so it's linked with other green spaces in the city. On the top right is a linear green space in Hamburg, Germany. And the bottom left is Duncan Terrace Gardens in Islington. And that's a series of linear gardens. So Islington is a good example. It's the densest borough in all of England, and it has very small green spaces. But Islington has really embraced these small spaces in part by linking them. So linear spaces show how we can still have a very green experience as we move about the city. And I included the photo on the bottom right, which is from Stockholm, to show how just a little planting and other design elements can create a bit of a green experience in even the smallest space. So they've essentially taken what was a wide staircase, added some plantings, added some benches, and created a very tranquil space. And on the afternoon that I took this photo, there were bees and butterflies hovering around the plants. Several people came and sat for a while on the benches. So it was a very used space. Next slide, please. So the photo in the top left and the top center were taken just a few feet apart. They're in Crooks Valley Park in Sheffield. And this is an example of what I see quite often in green spaces in urban areas. And that's how people engage or really don't engage with the green space because of how it's designed. This green space is near the university, and on the afternoon I was there were a constant stream of students and other pedestrians going by. But as you can see in the photo on the left, they were choosing not to go into the space. So the green space is accessible only in limited places, so there's really a missed opportunity for people to engage with the green space. The photo on the bottom left I've included, this is Gasholders Park at King's Cross, which is a small privately owned public green space. And I included it to show how the designers incorporated the site's heritage into a contemporary, very small space. And this is relevant for Grosvenor Square, which has such a rich history that Ed told us about earlier. The photo next to that on the center of the bottom is from Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, one of the rare opportunities we've had here in London to create a very sizable new green space. The park's designers use diverse, low-maintenance plantings, and this has implications for biodiversity and habitat, because very manicured parks, which we see quite a bit of in cities, are some of the least biodiverse spaces in a city. The photo on the top right and the bottom right, I've included really just to show how the urban context in which London's green spaces sit is really omnipresent. So we need to acknowledge this urban context when we're designing and managing our spaces. Final slide, please. So what does all of this mean for Grosvenor Square? I think there's some fantastic opportunities to make the square a more active participant in the urban environment. This starts with embracing the urban setting around it. Grosvenor Square is more than just a destination. For some people, it's a place they travel through, not just to. So I think how the square is accessed and how it feels as we approach it and leave it is important. There are opportunities to improve the biodiversity, such as through the types and the locations of plantings. And I think it's important to acknowledge Grosvenor Square's role in the wider network of green space across the West End and really across all of London. That can really magnify that green experience I mentioned. So to me, Grosvenor Square is more than just a patch of grass marooned in the city. Its success can come from being an active, multifunctional contemporary space that has an engaging relationship with the city around it. Thank you.
I'm going to move on to Judy, but if people have got questions for either about anything that Carole or Meredith have said, again, if you put it in the chat function, we will pick those up in the discussion section. So moving on to Judy now.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be speaking today because I'm really excited about this new opportunity to redesign Grosvenor Square. The uncertain times that we are living through because of COVID-19 and the parallel threat of climate change has really concentrated all of our minds to value our green spaces even more. My name is Judy Ling Wong, and I'm a poet, painter, and environmentalist wearing many hats. But today I'm speaking to you as one of the founding trustees of National Park City Foundation and Black Environment Network, an organization that promotes multicultural environmental participation. Next slide, please. The concept of a national park city draws from the values and the aims of the UK's traditional rural national parks: better conservation, better enjoyment, and better economy, and extends these in an urban context. Its defining characteristic is that we will pay equal attention to outstanding natural places and the potential of the built environment for wild nature. Next slide, please. So, talking of the redesign of Grosvenor Square, my personal approach is that London's green spaces should continue to reflect the fact of London as a multicultural global city, alive with the history and legacy of its eccentric plant hunters and plant collectors, its internationally inspired design features, connecting its citizens and visitors to their countries of heritage and creating a joyous sense of global interconnectedness. When I see plants like the magnolia, as you see on the left, my heart really feels of joy because I connect to my country of heritage. And above right are the beautiful leaves of banana plants. And I grew up in Hong Kong, which is a subtropical country. And when I see these, I really connect with that too. I'm sure many of our visitors also connect with different aspects of our plantings from all over the world. Next slide, please. So I think that what is really also important to me is to have areas of formality and stability in a structured design so that there's an opportunity for all the seasonal delights of plantings and also provide spaces for works of art. Next slide, please. So the other thing I think is really that we should have spaces where people can shelter and linger with a sense of mystery and inner discovery. If you had seen the little video, very short one in the center, you have seen the camera moving across and then you see the actual swing seat underneath all the draping branches of the elder. And this really creates a sense of privacy and of a place where you can imagine things and look out through the leaves into the surroundings. And I think spaces like this are very important. They can be very small, but very important for a space. Next slide, please. The other thing is to create contact with wildness, areas that provide a sense of freedom. The element that allows us to feel a sense of freedom is that kind of wildness of nature. If you look at a tree with 2 million leaves, you'll never find two that are exactly the same. Nature is that amazing. And here you see some of the elements that really connect us with nature when they feel a bit wild. Next slide, please. We should also have spaces for really exciting things that are of temporary interest. for social interaction and creative educational activities. Here you see a piano brought into the center of Covent Garden. It's one that you can actually play as well. And I think that is fabulous. It really temporarily livened up the place and provide a point of interest where ordinary people can share their talents as well. We can bring in all kinds of things and activities into a green space. Next slide, please. Last but not least, are green spaces and policy. Ultimately, we need to remember that policy is for people. Ideally, policy arises out of a love for people and remains anchored in the needs and wishes of people. I've worked in environmental participation for 30 years, and I can summarize the whole process in 2 phrases. We love what we enjoy, and we protect what we love. But giving access to the beauty and wonder of nature helps us to grow to love nature. But we cannot protect what we love unless we gain knowledge and capacity to do so. And this is where I hope the redesign of Grosvenor Square is conscious of the fabulous role that green spaces have to play, the pleasure it gives, and the educational dimensions of green spaces are all important to our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Judy. That was a really lovely moment to end on, the idea of how people are involved in places, in green places, and how we can have a kind of stewardship in them. So next we're going to hear from Edoardo, who's going to talk to us about blue in the city.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for connecting, and it's great to be talking about the future of Grosvenor Square. And I will be talking about why and how we need to bring water back into our cities. And I'm a water engineer, and my work looks at ways to plan and design water infrastructure to adapt to climate change, with a particular emphasis on London. Next slide. So how are we doing with our water in London? We know that London is rainy, but in fact, it's one of the most water scarce cities in the world. And the UK's Environment Agency tells us that actually within 20 years, we could be facing a water shortage. And it's not just that, it's also that our water supply distribution systems, so our pipes, are old and leaky and require major transformation. So in terms of our water supply, we face increasing demands and also scarcity under climate change. And we also face this aging infrastructure system. Next slide, please. And this is not it. Under the ground, the situation is even worse. Our wastewater is not just dirty, it is so dirty that it blocks the sewers, creating fatbergs, what engineers call fatbergs. And fatbergs are created when fat, oil, grease poured down sinks and drains combined with items that should not be flushed down the toilet, such as wet wipes, nappies, and cotton buds. These giant monsters of fat and oil block our sewers, and then Thames Water, the water utility, has to spend millions of pounds each year removing these blockages from the sewers and sending, as you see in the picture, people down the sewers to remove them manually, all because Londoners do not think when they flush. Next slide, please. So why do we have these water problems? And I think I'll go back here to the function and experience issue that I was talking about. It's because in our cities, our thinking around the function of our infrastructure and our shared urban spaces really sees water as an abundant resource and sees wastewater as a risk, something dirty that we don't want to hear about. And then there is also an issue with our perception. So this is more the individual. At the level of experience, we take water for granted. We forget to value it. We forget to see how our lives and histories connect to it. And more practically also, we just don't think when we open the tap or when we flush. We don't really see what's behind these daily things that we do. Next slide, please. So what can we do about it? And I wanted to share with you 3 experiences, which I'll call here 3 wisdoms from different cities around the world, which are trying to grapple with the problem of water in urban spaces. And the first example, the first wisdom is from Mexico City. Mexico City also faces a shortage of drinking water like London, but at the same time, it also faces a huge problem of flash floods. Every year, when it rains, the city gets flooded, and then when the rainy season ends, the city faces a water shortage, and the city is completely covered in concrete. Now, Mexico City's urban planners are working now with the concept of hydropuncture. To fight the double threat of water scarcity and flooding, they're starting to give space to water, which is what we see in the picture here. In practice, giving space to water through hydropuncture means constructing hydraulic parks where water can be diverted to during rainy days and then stored in these hydraulic parks, where the water is slowly allowed to go underground and recharge water supplies. And then these hydraulic parks, when the rainy season ends, are also green spaces for people to go and hang out. And in different parts of the city, creating these hydraulic parks can then help to recharge and reconstruct the water supplies which are being depleted. Next slide. Then we have the second wisdom from Singapore. We're going to Singapore, and if we look at this very engineering diagram, look first at the top left. As in London, water supply in Singapore also starts from rain. But contrary to London, every raindrop that falls on Singaporean soil is collected and delivered to reservoirs, which then send it off to be treated to drinking water quality standard, which is what you see at the bottom center of the figure. Then this water, which is being collected from the Singaporean soil, is treated, and it's also combined with other sources of water, such as this desalinated water from the sea, and then it's sent to households for consumption. And now here is the critical step. Where does the water go in Singapore? Once it's flushed, it's not just treated and then discharged to the sea, as it happens in London. The water that Singaporeans flush down the toilet is collected again, treated to very high quality, as shown in the top right of this diagram. And then part of it, and then that water is reused time and again. And in Singapore, they even came up with a name for this recycled wastewater, and it's called new water. And so the wisdom here is really that we need to collect and recycle all types of water, rainwater and wastewater, and not just fresh water. Next slide, please. And now this is the final wisdom, the third wisdom. Some of you might recognize this picture and might be wondering why an engineer would put it up, but this is Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck from Roman Holiday, a movie from the 1950s. And what they're standing next to the Mouth of Truth, which is this very beautiful mask placed in a church in the center of Rome. The myth says that if you place your hand inside the mask and you're a liar, then your hand will be bitten. This is the myth. In reality, the Mouth of Truth was an ancient Roman manhole. So this is what Roman engineers used to access their sewers, beautiful masks. They placed it as a manhole. Why was this? Because the Romans valued wastewater and knew the importance of handling it well. In Roman mythology, Cloacina, the cleanser, was the goddess who presided over the Cloaca Maxima, the main trunk of the system of sewers in Rome. Can you imagine in London having a deity or a goddess for sewers? And so then the third wisdom from the Roman times is that we need to respect sewers and, more in general, really try to reconnect with water in all its forms. Next slide. So how does this matter for Grosvenor Square? Next slide, please. I think these three wisdoms kind of help us think of Grosvenor Square as a space of course, as an engineer for function, so a space where we can close the water loops, collect rainwater, and also recycle wastewater for watering the gardens or cleaning purposes. So Grosvenor Square, again, as a place well integrated into our London-wide water supply system. And then secondly, also a space at the more individual level. Grosvenor Square as a space where we can reconnect with water at the individual level, a space to educate communities on the value of water and also wastewater, and also educating and showing people what the impacts of saving water and flushing responsibly can be. And I will conclude there. Thank you.
Green spaces, we don't really think about that connection to blue spaces or blue or water, or what's going to actually sustain that green. So finally, we have Anna, who is going to finish up our speakers' talks.
Yes, I'm going to start by introducing myself. I am an architect and was born in urban Taiwan and grew up in suburban America. I've been living in London for the last 20 years. So I'm very interested in the topic of city, green space, and our future. In our work, next slide, please. In our work, we have a mantra, which is to connect to nature. And that happens at many different scales, from the scale of using nature as symbols to actually looking at the workings of nature to find innovative techniques for architecture. And there's certain principles that we just love. Nature is never wasteful, and there's so much beauty in nature. Next slide, please. Such as this building that captures the rainwater from the roof and turns it into a spectacle of light at night when it lands on the surface of the courtyard. So every drop of rain is celebrated and enjoyed. Next slide, please. And using the symbol of a tree on the top of a hill as a way to rebuild a community's identity on the top of the hill above Burnley. Next slide. Designing as nature would. So everything in the project is working interdependent of each other, is working holistically. There's not any gratuitous part. And nature's like that when you look at the systems, the ecosystems in nature. Next slide. Project that's on site, a research that has looked at the form in nature and how that gives us extremely strong structural capacity to create super lightweight structures that can span this tower, which is 40 meters in the air. And that's with the tools we have now available to us to learn from nature. Next slide. So the topics today, the idea of urban, I wanted to talk about density and diversity. Next slide, please. We tend to think of cities as very built up, very dense. And I think it is true. All the infrastructure is designed to get you from A to B. Next slide, please. But if you look at the space between the A to B, you also discover an incredibly intense volume. And that's by pausing and standing, looking at the ground, beneath the ground and into the sky. And these are the spaces between buildings and between infrastructure. Next slide. There's incredible diversity in people. This is artist Steve McQueen's project called Year 3, photographing all of the Year 3 classes across London. It's an incredibly beautiful project about the diversity of a city like London. Next slide. Equally, there's diversity, there's still remnants of diversity in nature, only we don't experience it as much. And this kind of environment is having to deal with the extreme situation of reconciling with the environment of a city. So we can bring forth some of the ecology and the diversity of the ecology through our work. Next slide. Green space. What I love about green space is the potential to pause and think of the different time scales of nature. Next slide. And this ranges from the natural scales of time like sunrise, rainfall, weather, wind, to human rituals. So from a day to a year to seasons, decades, and finally, when you do pause to look at the leaves, you realize the 350 million years of formal evolution and the beauty in that little leaf. Next slide. So the experience of nature and the cycles of season, if you were to pause and experience the drop of the rain. Next slide. And if you were to engage with the scale and the makeup of, and do that in a sort of intimate way, you would feel the sense of wonder in nature. Next slide. And also what I love is the spontaneity and the generosity in a green space in the city. It caters for different people wanting to do different things. This is a tree-lined street down in Tainan, Taiwan, where I grew up. And it reminds you that you could do, it's adaptive, it's responsive. You could allow people to do different things, and it should be filled with joy all the time. Next slide. So what about the future? Now, I think this is a really tricky one because as architects, we are always dealing with future. How do we shape the future of something? How do we know this is the right thing? Next slide. We use a methodology in the studio called asking, looking, playing, making. The first step is asking questions about people, place, and time. Now, when we do that, we span across different time scales again. So it is, it was, it could be. So looking back at history and the origin of a place, looking for clues, but also looking at the circumstances now, the tools we have, and then trying to put ourselves in the future, because what we do now will stay for a long time to come, and we'll have to be meeting the challenges of our future. So in doing so, in the asking process, that places us directly in the future. Imagine that we are in the future. Next slide. And imagine that one of the demands will be the challenges of the climate change crisis. And how do we reconcile that with what we're doing now? Next slide. As architects, we have a responsibility to use all the tools we have available to us to meet some of these challenges. Some examples such as biomimetic design and advanced tooling and analysis could help us put a very optimum and true solution, true to our time, at using all of the ingenuity we have available to us. Next slide. What does this all mean for Grosvenor Square in 2020? Next slide. Let's remind ourselves that in 1720, when Grosvenor Square originated, it had a pioneer social vision about putting a space in the middle of London for a community. And now in 2020, next slide, what could it be? What could the story be? Could it be about the environmental vision? And if we were to combine that with a social vision, could that become the catalyst for its transformation? Next slide. What we do now will become the legacy for the community in the future. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Anna. So now I'm going to ask all of our speakers to join us, and so that we can have a bit of a discussion. I've got some of your questions, audience, that you've been asking on the chat function, but also feel free to send more in so that we can pose them to the speakers. So do we have all the speakers there?
Yep.
Fantastic. So firstly, I think prompted by the stories that Carole was telling us, I think there's something interesting about the role of this productive landscape as a way to connect people to place. So whether that's food growing or whether that's through I guess, the education components, which threads through also what Judy was saying. So I'm just wondering if there's if the panel has something to say about how people, and particularly kind of how people connect to their immediate green spaces. Go on, Anna.
Yeah, that responds to some of the points that have been brought up. This idea of identifying with green spaces through maybe the type of planting, the things you can do with the plant, whether it's cooking it or eating it. So that is because people look for different things in a green space. Some might just purely enjoy the planting, but some might really want to do something with it.
I completely agree with that. I feel that it's really important that one goes into a green space, and instead of being just a spectator, there are actually things to actually do as well. And that's why I was interested in having spaces in a green space where it allows for a temporary transformation, so that instead of coming into a completely unchanging design green space, there's spaces where it's changing all the time and it stimulates us. And also the idea of being able to take things home, some things from the green space, whether someone's helped to grow something, and if there's spare plants, perhaps people can take them back, or whether it's something you can cook and things like that, or to sit around and share stories from different countries. I think all those things build a community and a real relationship to what is around us in the green space.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I like the idea of pop-up events. I love that. We've done so many here, and I don't think there's a green space that I've been involved in or seen others involved in where we haven't had cultural events, pedal-powered cinemas, bouncy castles, food giveaway, nutrition, water. Thames Water's come along and spoken about water-saving devices, elders, you know, all sorts of activities. At the heart of it is people and their different cultures. We've had storytelling going on, and recipe books. We've created recipe books. People have contributed recipe ideas from what they've grown. We've had seeds brought over from Ghana. Yes, I am aware of biosecurity people. So, yeah. And we had those. You see, this is it. I love things like that because it opens up a whole next avenue of conversation, which you can just put it in. It's a bit like your parents hiding the greens under something that you really want to eat. You know, you don't really want to eat the greens, but because they've hidden it so well. And that's kind of my approach when I'm doing these projects. And I work with, you know, developers, architects, and all sorts of people, Peabody executives and Barrett's owners. And you just like, well, my first question is, what's in it for me? When public works or whatever come, I'm like, what's not just what's in it for me as an individual, what's in it for the community? So if the community are to get involved, what's in it for the community? What's their takeaway? Because I know me as an individual, what I'm taking away. I'm just happy to look at a blade of grass, to be honest, you know, but what's in it for them? And I don't knock on their door until I know what's in it for them.
Do you think, sorry, do you think, Carole and Judy, that this temporary transformation and also what people want, do you think that could center around the planting? Because we're working with an incredible horticulturalist and ecologist who really know their stuff. So if say, for instance, the temporary transformation is bluebells, you know, that could be spectacular, equally spectacular as, you know, maybe some of these events. So it's driven by the planting.
I think that's right. I think that's true. I've been really interested as we've been going through this process on the ability to create reasons to come back. And I agree with Anna that those reasons don't have to be, you know, infrastructure stuff that's put into the thing. It can be, you know, the time of year where the cob nuts are out, or, you know, there's something is flowering, and it means that whether it's March July or November, there's a reason to go and bring the community together throughout the year. And I think that's something we'd love to achieve.
Yeah.
I think there's also an opportunity for partnership and to help others with ambitions to involve the community, especially around learning. For example, the Natural History Museum, it has this urban garden that is done for a long time, and it's trying to develop ideas to spread the idea of learning about biodiversity, animals, and so on, by designing model, very small spaces, naming specific plants and so on, that people then create these spaces either in green spaces or in their own gardens and so on. And then what happens then is by doing that, one can link into the resources of the Natural History Museum. And also, if links are formed, people can also be encouraged to go and look up something more about the history of something in the Natural History Museum and come back to the green space even more informed. And I also think about climate change and things like that. We need more knowledge to be more effective. And so these links of the larger institutions, understanding more and so on, both allows us to have the knowledge to do something as well as the pleasure.
There's something really interesting coming back from the comments from the audience around this thinking of can we go back to or reflect some of what Grosvenor Square used to be in terms of its aspiration to be wilder. Although I love, Ed, that you always point out that plan doesn't look particularly wild, but maybe at the time it was what was considered to be wild. And then also that balance of what that means for the water piece, Edoardo. So, if we're talking about this notion of kind of biodiversity and things that are really flourishing, how do we bring back water, but in a way that is sustainable?
Yes, Catherine. There are many ways, and I think Anna was showing an example of these rainwater harvesting structures, which also allow us to value each and every single drop of rainwater that we collect. But then, there is certainly that aspect, but to me, there is also the aspect of looking at water, the aspects of water that we forget, and so the wastewater. Is there a way that in Grosvenor Square we could look into what's flowing in the sewers and then recycling it to use for watering the gardens that are going perhaps to be placed in Grosvenor Square? I think there is an opportunity for green spaces to help us also reconnect with the water that we often forget and take for granted.
I think that's right. One of the things that struck me was that the way you experience water, there's a few different ways you can experience water, and I think that it obviously, if it's running, it has a sound, and that helps people connect with it. And equally, if it's not fenced off, you can get involved, and you can play in it, and there's so many examples of amazing children's play with water. But also, if it's large enough and it's still, it can be very calming. It can create an amazing sort of sense of calm, and how you deploy water in a way that helps people connect with all the points that Edoardo's been making about how important it is I think a really interesting question.
There's I think, Meredith, in your talk you had you said, could the park be made more or a bit like it was originally? And I guess that also touches on what people are saying is, can we reflect some of that? I wonder whether you can say something about how you imagine that manifesting.
So what I was saying is really to understand that there is a deep, rich history, not to try to replicate that, actually, literally. One of the great inheritances we have in Britain is, from the Victorians and their public park movement, which Grosvenor Square predates that. But I think kind of trying to harness that transformative and that innovation more so than actually literally trying to put back in place what was there. And so when you think about how, I love the way Ed talked about the history of Grosvenor Square and really just how progressive the thinking was at the time. And so kind of borrowing that from the past instead of literally trying to replicate what we've seen on the space would be in the spirit of Grosvenor Square.
I think that's right, Meredith, because we can't afford to just put back what was there hundreds of years ago. We have to think of the future. We have to think of future generations and the challenges they're facing, which are very different to when the square was originated. So capturing the spirit of innovation and forward thinking and really running with that to try to put ourselves in the future is extremely important.
Yeah, I always say that, the Victorians weren't concerned about climate change. And so we can't try to copy exactly what they did, because the setting was different and the challenges were different. The reason they purposed spaces were different.
Okay, brilliant. And we've got a nice challenging question for you from the audience, which is, I'm going to come to each of you, including you, Ed, but give one sentence stating your principal vision for Grosvenor Square Garden. Ed, I'm going to come to you first.
One sentence. I would like to see Grosvenor Square be a beautiful garden, to really be a natural haven within the city that changes throughout the seasons and creates moments of spectacle that people want to experience.
Fantastic. Judy?
I would like Grosvenor Square to become the movement for London National Park City, the movement in which we want to see more and more green and nature, that London does become greener, wilder, and connecting to people, that people are healthier and happier, and it's going to be part of that fabric. I really look forward to
it. Carole?
I'd like to see Grosvenor Square redesign being spoken about throughout the world for its innovation, whether that's sustainable drainage, the partnership working, that it's really on the environmental maps, the square to visit. So not only do we know its rich history, but we know the rich future that it has. So yeah, destination because of what's there.
Meredith?
I think I would like to see Grosvenor Square really harness that love and that focus on greenness that we've seen in London really for centuries, and that London's known for, but done so in a contemporary way that makes the space resilient for current Londoners and Londoners in the future.
Edoardo?
I would like to see Grosvenor Square becoming a model for all future renovations of squares across London and Europe.
I like it. Bold. And Anna?
I would like to see Grosvenor Square as a environmentally and socially forward-thinking entity.
Amazing. So I'm gonna ask you one last question at the end, but I just want to read out this comment that someone has written, which I think brings together the two pieces that people have been talking about, which is that there has to be some nod to the history. So thinking about what is the particular specifics of Grosvenor Square as a place. It's got such a strong kind of look and feel and history, but it also needs to take into account the environmental issues. And that's probably the kind of the balance and the push and pull of this project. Before we finish, I think it'd be really great just to think about what the key lessons from this discussion for Grosvenor Square would be. So what's, it's great to have really wide-reaching conversations, but what are we going to do with that? So again, audience, if you can put your answers to this in the chat function, that would be fantastic. But panel, I'm going to come to you and get something just that you think short and pithy. So Meredith, I'm going to come to you first.
So one of the things that's really resonated with me, I think several people have mentioned it, is that Grosvenor Square needs to be accessible, from whether you're approaching it from outside the square to even once you're inside the square. And that means that it needs to really be part of the urban fabric and connected to the built environment and to other green spaces around the West End and around London as well.
Fantastic. Edoardo.
Yeah, I think the key lesson for me is that Grosvenor Square needs to be sustainable, both from a functional engineering perspective, environmentally sustainable, but more importantly, emotionally sustainable, in the sense that people that engage with the square are then returning it to it several times and continuing their relationship with the space.
Fantastic. Carole.
I think Grosvenor Square needs to be welcoming, irrespective of your cultural, financial, physical, mental ability. I think how do you make that part of London with that square and the history of squares accessible to anybody to go in and see what this redesign is about? Yeah.
Fantastic. Judy.
I think that Grosvenor Square has an opportunity to play its role in the context of a multicultural 21st century. I think that it has spaces in it, allows it to have an evolving global vision, constantly changing and responding to people, both residents and visitors. I think it would be a great, great contribution.
Great. Anna.
I think the historic formality of this beautiful square is very much enhanced by a new environmental, almost activism. Activism meaning it's an active garden that is doing a lot more, or is making visible a lot of the process that are already at work in nature. And whether it's the flow of the water or the budding of the leaves.
Ed, and finally, last but not least.
I guess I've kind of got two takeaways from this discussion, so I'm going to bend your rules. I think that it's well, no, they're related but it's about people and nature, isn't it? And about how you deliver well-being and amenity to the people who use the square now and to the people who will use the square in the future, but also how you make sure that the square is working hard for nature and for the environment and for water and for all the other aspects that a modern green space needs to do. I think it's been a fascinating conversation.
Fantastic, thank you. So a really heartfelt thank you to the audience watching us and commenting, and this is our first event in a series, so we have been had a few little hiccups, so thanks for telling us, and we've managed to sort those, I hope. It's been really fantastic. Thank you so much to our speakers. It's been wonderful to hear from so many different perspectives. I've got so much food for thought. If you have any other thoughts and comments, visitors or audience at home, if you can get involved and follow the conversation online on the Grosvenor Square website. You can also sign up for updates there and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. So coming up, we've got a whole programme of events. The next one being next Tuesday, 12th of May, 5 to 6:30, when we're going to be talking about accessing the outdoors. So you can sign up via the Eventbrite link that's there, and at the bottom you'll see that there's grosvenor.square@grosvenor.com email address. So if you've been watching on live and you've had thoughts and comments and things that you want to send in but haven't been able to do it via Facebook, you can send an email to that address and we will collect them all up. So thank you. I'm assuming, Ed, you want to say thank you too?
I do, yeah. Thank you to our speakers and thank you to the audience. And I look forward to the rest of the conversation. There's a lot to talk about. Yeah,
looking forward to seeing you having you at one of our events soon, because actually we can't see you. Okay, thank you everybody.
Thank you.
I would like to say thank you to the Grosvenor team. Really well done. It's been a lovely event.
Oh,
thanks, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Well, that's really the Make Good team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.